Hello, I'm Juju, today's host. We are the Literature Association from Chung University, and today we invite Benjamin Hill, who is currently Assistant Professor of American Literature at National Chung University, Taiwan. He completed his doctoral thesis titled Transatlantic Cross-Currents, European Influences and Descents in the work of Paul Bowles and William Barrow at the University of Kent in 2016, and has presented conference papers, guest lectures on his work internationally. And today we invite him to talk about movies, literature, and music. Hello, Ben.
Hello, Juju. Very nice to see you and to be here and to share some of my knowledge about some of these things that you want to talk about today.
Yeah, so I heard that our introduction music is FX Twin's music work, right?
Yeah, that's
I really like the song.
Yeah, it's by a UK artist, electronic artist called Aphex Twin. His real name is Richard D. James, and he's quite an interesting and prolific artist who's been working in the fields of electronic music and what's called intelligent dance music, although many people don't like the use of that term for a number of reasons.
What is intelligent dance music?
Well, it's dance music that has a more sort of cerebral or more intelligent element to it rather than just boom, 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 repetitive beats and very like simple sort of algorithmic, arpeggiated, programmed music. It has something that sounds a bit more like a composition, or could even be equated to forms of classical music. Now, with Aphex Twin, he's often been compared with great classical composers like Mozart and Beethoven, which is quite strange considering that he considers himself just a glorified DJ, really, and is interested in rave culture. So really, the origins of this form of music and this kind of intelligent dance music really began in the early 1980s, and is an amalgam or a blend of various different kinds of music and experimentation that was happening in the early 80s, which came out of punk rock in part, but also a form called industrial music. There was a hip-hop scene and hip-hop and Chicago dance music scene at the end of the 1970s, which sort of emerged from disco, the sort of house scene over there, and also from the krautrock scene in Germany, sort of more experimental edges of experimental German rock music and avant-garde music. So all these things kind of came together in the early 1980s and began to congeal into what we now think of as intelligent dance music.
So is there any like stupid dance music?
Well, yeah, I mean, you could argue that. I mean, dance music really did evolve in a way into so many different strands and streams, and, with amusing names and amusing types like happy hardcore and all the different forms of rave and hard house and happy house, and you have things like grime music now as well, which is sort of another re-emergence of different elements that go into dance music. But really with with Aphex Twin, what we're talking about is a real punk rock sensibility that comes with with a certain form of cerebral intelligence. I think you can trace some of this back to bands like post-punk bands like Devo, and also perhaps even bands like the Raincoats and other new wave bands like Talking Heads, which started to, and particularly there's a UK band called Wire, which they were a punk band, but they really wanted to intellectualize punk music, and it were one of the early bands to really incorporate synthesizers into their music and treat it seriously as an instrument, not just something to make funny sound effects.
Yeah, because like punk and say grunge.
Grunge,
yeah. Grunge. They are from originally they are like subculture.
Yeah, well, if you think about bands like the Sex Pistols, I probably ought to play some early examples of this kind of music at some point. But I want to kind of introduce you to one of the earliest songs, intelligent dance music songs that I heard in the sort of mid-1980s by a band called Orbital. But I'll play that in a second. So really if you think about the early days of punk rock, it was about the bands like the Ramones and bands like the Sex Pistols. And really, they were basically just doing rock and roll, but just with a slight edge to it. There wasn't a real sense of experimentation. Whereas with the sort of later post-punk bands, they really started to incorporate synthesizers and other more experimentalism with their use of music, and they started getting hold of cheaper instruments. Also, another touchstone is Joy Division and New Order, when the Joy Division and that connection with Factory Records, when Ian Curtis died from the Joy Division, the emergent band of New Order started to experiment with synthesizers much more, and you get the hits song Blue Monday that came out of that, which is it's a real touchstone of electronic music.
Yeah, because for me, electronic music, I mean, in Taiwan, I often hear it in like religious events. For me, it's like only kids love it. But after I listened to FX Twin, I mean, really surprised me that it is so great, and like you said, it's very avant-garde, and I can feel its aesthetic. Before I couldn't. I mean, maybe I didn't listen much electronic music, but FX Twin really just surprised me, just blown my mind.
Well, of course, as I said, the other key touchstone behind this, and one of Ian Curtis's favourite bands when he was working on writing songs with the Joy Division before he tragically killed himself, but he loved Kraftwerk, which of course were these pioneering German musicians of the 1970s, originally involved in more sort of psychedelic happenings with the krautrock movements, which came out of sort of hippie music, and they became real pioneers, actually creating their own electronic instruments to try to really move away from the more organic sounds that they began, or more acoustic instruments, or the use of guitars and drums, and instead to just use electronic sounds in their music.
Combine different instruments together.
Yeah, really have this sort of more science fiction aesthetic that connects with, that really tries to look at the future and consider the future. So I think it's probably a good idea if we actually listen to some of this now. So I'll play a song by Kraftwerk first of all, and I'll tell you a bit about that afterwards, and then we'll play another track after that.
Sure.
Okay. So that was a song called The Man Machine from the 1978 album by Kraftwerk, also called The Man Machine.
Mm-hmm.
Made extensive use of synthesizers, but it's probably most notable for being Kraftwerk's breakthrough album.
Yes.
Right at the tail end of the punk rock movement, which sort of started to peter out in 1978, Kraftwerk's The Model, which was actually a B-side, got lots of airplay, radio play, both in the UK and America, and became a surprising radio hit and college radio hit, and sort of opened the door really for the possibilities of more experimentation by bands with synthesizers. And really you see a lot of this across the 1980s in mainstream music, really, with pop music becoming increasingly not just commercialized, but less reliant on traditional instruments and more reliant on studio synthesizers.
Yeah.
You have the introduction of the Fairlight synthesizer, which could you sample almost any sound and be used as an instrument, and it became a very sort of cheesy effect on a lot of quite bad commercial music in the 1980s. Even Devo attempted to use a Fairlight. So I think probably now's a good time to actually listen to a Devo song. So this is a Devo song from 1980. So Devo were a new wave band that gained some success, and a sort of surprising success, given that their aesthetics are totally postmodern and totally off the wall.
When you say new wave, does it have any relation to the French new wave song?
No, not at all really. Not at all really. It's just a kind of a new wave of sort of punk rock really. It was kind of beyond punk rock. You have bands like REM coming from this, and various other post-punk bands where punk rock kind of exploded and created lots of new forms. Bands like Blondie and Talking Heads are referred to as new wave bands as well. But with Devo, they were a very strange bunch who were at Kent State University, and were at the time there was riots, and the police actually shot dead several student protesters on the campus back in 1970.
Wow.
And the guys in Devo, Gerald Casale, mainly, and Mark Mothersbaugh, they wanted to sort of respond to this. So really they're art students who came at sort of punk rock and rock music in the 1970s with a bit of a twist, and wanted to do something different and make more of an art statement than anything. But Devo as a band, they really wanted to experiment, and I think you see that in the music. But they experimented extensively with synthesizers and with electronic instruments from the beginning of their 1980s period, and I think it's very interesting. So anyway, here's a song from their 1980 album Freedom of Choice, a song called Snowball.
Okay.
A snowball grows until it gets too big, until she lost control, and it rolled back down, and it rolled back down, and it rolled back down, and it rolled back down. I saw it
is really great. I like it.
Yeah, Devo, wonderful band. Sadly, a couple of the members have died fairly within the last few years, so it's a bit tragic. But they still remain active or semi-active. Gerald Casale is quite a political figure. Mothersbaugh is very notable for doing lots of kids' TV show music.
Kids TV show.
Yeah, things like Space Ghost and what was the other one? Rugrats was a famous TV show that he did the music for, and he does lots of movies,
That's interesting.
lots of kids' movie music. So he's quite into this sort of cheap, cute stuff. Anyway, to move on a little bit, so electronic music really developed at pace in the early 1980s, certainly the mid-1980s, when you get an explosion on the underground scene in line with an explosion, particularly in the UK, I'm referring to here, with what started off as indie music and became taken over by baggy music in Manchester. And this coincided with sort of increased use of drugs, like hallucinogenic drugs such as LSD, and also mixed with amphetamines and speed, but most importantly was MDMA or ecstasy, which became...
You're like a drug expert.
Well, I know a bit about this because of my research in literature, because of, I've written extensively about William S. Burroughs, who's one of the founding fathers of drug literature, if you like. And so this period really was a sort of a second coming, a second hippie explosion after the 1960s, certainly in the UK, with this emergence of a new drug culture. And electronic music really reflected that on a number of levels. First of all, it was able to create a very powerful, pulsing dance rhythm that really could capture the sensibilities of a club at that time. And you even have bands trying to sort of capture that spirit and move away from, again, traditional instruments that indie bands were using and involve more electronic instruments. You have bands like, for example, the Stone Roses and the Happy Mondays. I already mentioned New Order, who were involved in doing that already. And it seems like that was in part inspired by their first use dabbling with ecstasy. Ecstasy being a drug that really sort of makes the body want to move. Really is a physical drug that creates a sense of both euphoria, but also a needing to dance and need to expressively dance. And I think this is very important in combination with the kind of the things that electronic music could do, particularly in terms of also sampling. And sampling music, as I mentioned, the Fairlight synthesizer that could sample sounds, where you also start to get sort of tape samples and various other sampling techniques becoming more widespread. You already had sampling being used extensively in hip-hop music, but it became prevalent in different types of dance music at the time. You also have ambient music appearing as well, which, again, after people were using ecstasy for long periods, you have in the rave clubs and the rave festival areas, you have chill out zones for people to calm down.
It's like the music is about sensation.
Yeah, very much about sensation.
Like a few days ago, I went to an exhibition, and the exhibition is really interesting. So it showed us the image of sound, and especially electronic sound, and the image is really beautiful.
Yeah, it's quite surprising how much power electronic music can have over a person's sort of psychological and physical makeup.
Yeah, I mean the same as drug. I think that's the connection.
Absolutely, both things kind of work together in a kind of harmony. And I think that's what people were discovering in the 1980s, and certainly Aphex Twin was right at the forefront of that.
Speaking of this, I think I know that Aphex Twin, the DJ, has a kind of like he can see the sound.
Yeah, he suffers from, well, apparently he suffers from synesthesia, where again he sees sounds as colours.
Oh, as colors.
They create a sort of colour effect on his, in his perception, perceptual field, which is quite fascinating. Really.
Yeah, it's really fascinating.
I think now's probably a good time to listen to some music. I'd like to play some ambient music and bring it down. So this is by a band called The Orb, who are fascinating on a number of levels. First of all, because there is a connection between The Orb and both world music and punk rock, in that one of the members of The Orb was... he was a record producer. He was very closely associated with the recording industry, and he kind of despised it in a way. And his name is what's his name? He was also connected with a band called the KLF, which are very much an anti band. Oh, Bill Drummond it is. So Bill Drummond was a member of The Orb as well, and he wasn't a member of The Orb, but he was a member of the KLF. But Jimmy Corti, who was also a member of the KLF, was a member of The Orb as well. So I got myself mixed up between my members, but it's a complicated family tree, and a lot of these groups were very closely connected. But also, what was the big stimulus behind The Orb? They began as a kind of a chill-out band, really, very much influenced by Brian Eno and Kraftwerk. And they're very much obsessed with that idea of coming down. You know, when people were on ecstasy, they'd be very high, but then when the drug wore off, it introduced a sort of hangover, a sort of coming down, which needed these chill-out spaces, and The Orb were involved in that very much. But also closely connected with them was a friend of theirs called Jar Wobble, who's got an interesting name anyway. Yeah, and he was the bass player of Johnny Rotten's band after the Sex Pistols, which was PIL, Public Image Limited, and it's very much experimenting with dub sounds and dub reggae sounds and experimental. Oops, just dropped something there. Sorry. So I'd like to play a song by The Orb to bring things down a little bit here.
is really cool. I mean, it is repetitive, but also like have its own diversity.
Yeah, there are a whole range of different mixes of the song.
Yeah. But
Which,
somehow the same, and somehow it's actually different.
well, yes, but like there is a 40-minute, the full-length version of the song is the length of an album, like 40 minutes. In fact, it held the record as being the longest single in the charts. The longest length of a single song to reach the charts in the UK.
Of course, it's experimental too.
Yeah, so they had to do an edited version when they appeared on the television, and they had a famous appearance on the TV where the two musicians, if you like, played an imaginary, a very weird game of chess on the TV. It became quite famous.
Yeah.
So it's very cool. A lot of their songs actually emerged from their friends that I mentioned, Jow Wobble, just sending them tapes of interesting samples and interesting voices and things that he'd heard, and they would just incorporate those samples into their music.
Okay, so I think today our intelligent dance music part is coming to an end, but we will have second part next week. And now I want to talk about movie. Because we are the Literature Association, and we do screen movies every week.
Yeah, that's right. We try to screen a movie every week if we can for the students, and I know that we've got a whole schedule worked out for this month. So on April the 9th, I'm going to be screening. Which is a Thursday, I'm going to be screening 1984. It's a movie based on George Orwell's great story. Yeah. Then on April the 14th, we're going to be screening David Lynch's acclaimed 2001 movie Mulholland Drive. It sort of deals with the underbelly of Hollywood. It's very much a postmodern movie that breaks a lot of the boundaries of narrative and storytelling. Really great. Yeah. One of the greatest films of the 21st century, supposedly. Then on 21st of April, I'm going to go back and screen another science fiction movie.
Yeah, because you have been teaching science fiction
I'm teaching science fiction this semester, so there is very much a focus on sci-fi. So I'm going to be screening the Paul Verhoeven adaptation of Starship Troopers. So he's more famous for movies like RoboCop and Total Recall. The great Dutch director.
Total Recall, we've watched that movie before.
Yeah, we watched that.
We know the same director.
Yes, the same director. So he's very violent, but also very satirical.
Totally.
So this is his adaptation of the Robert Heinlein classic novel that's basically about Earth has become more or less a fascist dictatorship.
It's like now.
Yeah, well, arguably and ironically, yes. So that's a really great and interesting movie if you have a strong stomach. And then on the 28th of April, something a bit more interesting is the 1938 Marcel Carné movie Pepe Le Mocco, which stars Jean Gabin.
Sounds so cute.
Great Jean Gabin. Well, it's not that cute. It's actually about.
It's Pepe Le Mocco.
well, it's very interesting. Again, given the current state of the world being under sort of house arrest. Oh, I'm sorry, it's not Marcel Carné. It's Julien Duvivier. But from the same school of poetic realism, kind of pre-film noir movie. And this movie is really great for a number of reasons, but one is it focuses on this gangster, Pepe Le Mocco.
So what does he mean by Pepe Le Mocco? Is it French?
Well, it is... Mocco is slang for a man from Toulon. It just means the man from Toulon, which is derived from a French dialect called Occitan. And so it's sort of from the south of France, really. But it's great because he's a criminal on the run from the police who lives in the Casbah in Algiers in North Africa. And the local police keep trying to get him to come out, but he refuses. So he's in lockdown in the
Like now again.
yeah, again in the Casbah, which is like a maze anyway. I mean, I've been to different parts of Morocco, in the Casbahs,
Wow,
in
that's cool.
two parts of Morocco, and they really are like mazes. You walk down 2 streets and you're completely lost.
Yeah.
And this movie captures that feeling very well. And it's a really
Uh-huh.
great, beautifully acted and beautifully shot movie.
Looking forward to it.
Yeah, so that's our schedule for April, really. So I hope to see lots of people there.
Yeah, I hope so too.
Oh, I should say we usually screen the movies in R137, and they usually start at 7:30, or usually starting at 8 p.m.
Yeah, humanities building.
That's correct, in the humanities building.
Yeah.
Okay.
And today I want to talk about the movie Midnight Cowboy. Because I know that you also study James Leon Hurley.
Oh yes, so yeah, Midnight Cowboy is a 1969 adaptation of James Leo Hurley's 1965 novel Midnight Cowboy. Hurley's a fascinating kind of forgotten author. You know,
Yeah.
For me, he's one of the great writers of the mid 20th century in America, and he's forgotten in large part because he basically stopped writing. He wrote these 4 great novels, along with some plays and a few short stories.
Oh, he also like play.
Yeah, and then just decided to get out of writing, stopped writing, and lived his life fairly happily. He also did a little bit of acting as well.
Oh, really?
Some bit part acting. Yeah.
Yeah, I really love this music. I mean, I cried so hard, when I watched it. I mean, it is so, just so beautiful, poetic, and sad.
Yeah.
So it's, very existential.
Oh, very much so. Hurley, he was very much influenced by existentialism. And I mean, I've seen his letters to Paul Bowles, and he shares his, he gets a sense from Bowles' work that they were both very much influenced by probably more Albert Camus than Jean-Paul Sartre's brand of existentialism. And they really do deal with that existential dread and the sense of personal isolation, and the disconnections from other people in a really interesting way. But I think that Hurley really captures the emotions in a very, very interesting, very realistic way.
Yeah, I think because before watching Cowboy, I watched the Joker, and I think they are both focusing on those characters, that is the small characters, and in New York, right? I just feel like it's a comparison between small character in a big city, and they're kind of lost.
Yeah, I can see that. I can see parallels with Joker, and I think that definitely the Joker is trying to channel a lot of the sensibilities of what we now talk about in relation to 1970s American cinema. And I think Midnight Cowboy marks really the turning point when Hollywood cinema really started to embrace a lot of dark themes, and a lot of the great directors really started to come to the forefront in Hollywood after the 1960s. That's not to say there weren't lots of dark movies in the 1960s. Certainly Roman Polanski's movies like Repulsion, and there's several others I can think of from the 60s. But the 70s, they really start to come out. And you get stuff like...
it's like a gold age of dark movie.
You do. You get... Well, and of course Midnight Cowboy won the best movie Oscar in 1969, the 42nd Academy Awards anyway. I think it's 1969.
But it was an X-rated film.
It was an X-rated film, but it was interesting because it beat Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, which a lot of people actually find as a more memorable movie, and more people refer to Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, which is written by William Golding, which is the great Paul Newman, Robert Redford, who were the huge, big stars of Hollywood at the time.
Yeah.
But it really, for Midnight Cowboy with its really sad, tragic ending, and it's
I mean,
like
it's too tragic.
total lack of uplift.
I couldn't help, crying.
Yeah, it just is the only other sort of director I can think of is maybe what's his name? The German director Fassbinder, whose movies just like a relentless slog, and then something sad happens.
Yeah.
And it really is a challenge in some ways to get through it. But there's so much heart and spirit in the acting, in Jon Voight and Dustin Hoffman's acting. And Schleisinger's direction is actually much more artistic and much more experimental. Than,
it's very experimental.
Yeah, it's easily missed.
It's like the cut up scene.
Very much so.
In the film.
Very much so. It really captures something of the era, of that sort of experimentalism with Andy Warhol's factory and William Burroughs cut-up techniques coming to the forefront. And yet that's often overlooked when people think about this movie and discuss it. Mostly they consider its X-rated status, and they really focus very much on the really tremendous performance, really, by Dustin Hoffman as the.
Yeah, he's so great in this movie.
Yeah, he sadly lost out. He didn't get the Oscar that year. I'm trying to remember who beat him to the Oscar in that year.
I remember it's like the cowboy or Western
movie. No, I think that was the Best Actor Oscar. I think you might actually be right. You might be right. It was snapped up by John Wayne for True Grit, I think. But I'm just going to check. Let's see, Best Actor. Yeah, Dustin Hoffman was nominated, but John Wayne did get it for True Grit, which I think is. True Grit is great, but I think maybe Dustin Hoffman should have edged that really. But anyway.
I mean, also like the stories about hustler. I mean, usually, like maybe we focus on prostitution in like fantasy.
Yeah. Well, we should play the trailer a second. So
okay.
If we play the trailer.
Sure. Okay. I think we should play the trailer.
Joe Buck.
Where's that Joe Buck?
Yeah, where's that Joe Buck?
I'm Joe Buck from Texas.
Enrico Rizzo from the Bronx.
His name is Joe Buck. He's a cowboy. He just came in from Texas.
Cowboy, huh?
I ain't a for real cowboy, but I am one hell of a stud.
Then how come you ain't scored once the whole time you've been in New York?
'Cause I need management, goddammit!
Let's go.
Hey! I'm walking here! I'm walking here!
You were gonna ask me for money? How much is this gonna cost me?
$20.
You big Texas longhorn bull!
No rich lady with any class at all buys that cowboy crap anymore. Frankly, you're beginning to smell. And for a stud in New York, that's a handicap.
I should never have asked you up here.
More goddamn faggots in this town.
I'm gonna use you. I'm gonna run you ragged!
Hey, listen, don't get sore or anything, okay? I don't think I can walk anymore. I'm scared. You know what they do to you when they find out that you can't walk. Oh, Christ.
Everybody's talking at home. I don't hear a word they're saying, only the echoes of my mind. People stopping, staring. I can't see their faces, only the shadows of their eyes.
Not bad for a cowboy.
I'm going where the sun keeps shining through the pouring rain. Going well.
Okay, so do you want to just give a summary of the plot? I think it's probably worth doing at this stage. Okay, I'll give a summary of the plot. So the story centers around Joe Buck, who's this young Texan guy who he works a menial job as a dishwasher, really, and he's unsure of really his background, sort of raised, I think, by his grandmother, and like he feels like the one thing in his life that he's good at is sex, and he loves wearing like cowboy clothes,
Yeah,
and he thinks.
a feature.
Yeah, he thinks that he can go to New York. Somebody's told him that like all the women in New York will pay money for sex, and he thinks, well, that's what he's good at. That's what he's going to go and do.
The cowboy part. Is it because it's about American culture?
Yeah, it was a romantic kind of allusion to
Cowboy.
the symbolism of virility, and a real man is a cowboy.
It's like, because they're like hero. It's
very much so. It's been
Yeah.
which is interesting given that, you know, of course, John Wayne, the true man's man cowboy, won the Oscar that year for Best Actor, of course. But this movie, Midnight Cowboy, is very much like flips that and satirizes that idea and shows how underlying this idea of virility in a real man, you have a sense that can be misinterpreted. Really, it is about the constructed nature of not just the cowboy as a symbol of male masculinity and virility and strength, but how America is a kind of false construction, and underlying all the kind of American dreams of success and of, again, strength and virility, underlying that is this fragility and sickness that Joe Buck is constantly confronted with, and he keeps trying to see the best in everything, until, again, what happens at the end of the movie perhaps does or doesn't change his viewpoint. Yeah, without spoiling it too much. But anyway, so he goes to New York. He has all these bad experiences trying to kind of make money. People. And the women he has sex with go, what? You expect me to pay you?
Yeah.
Right?
And it turned out like he paid them back.
Yeah, so he runs out of money, and of course he meets up with this other hustler who tries to steal money from him already.
Yeah.
Ratso Rizzo, played by Dustin Hoffman, who is similarly, on down and out, is a homeless guy, and he's also acutely sick. And yeah, it's just. But their relationship is one that's very sweet and it's very well judged. And you also get these real sort of vignettes, these views of different sides of society in New York, particularly from eccentric Warhol-like artists having happenings, all the way through to sort of rich, wealthy women who live off men, basically. So it's a real fascinating movie and a fascinating story, and the novel itself is really beautifully constructed. I recommend anybody to read the novel as well as to watch the movie, I think.
Also, I don't know why just when you introduce it, also remind me of The Catcher in the Rye and the kind of innocence. I mean, I think he's an innocent guy.
Yeah, well, I think
he has a kind heart, hope for the best.
Yeah.
But the society beat him down.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of that. There's a real interesting sensibility that Hurley has, grasping the sort of the inner voice of his characters.
Yeah.
I think that comes out, of course, in The Catcher in the Rye, but in his other works such as Awful Down, which is about a young boy whose brother sort of leaves town, and his journey to try and find what's happened to his brother, and his brother, who the family all look up to, turns out to be not as good as they thought he was. And also his later novel, The Season of the Witch, which is actually from a young girl's perspective, as she kind of fully embraces the hippie movement and travels to New York City, and again gets involved in some very strange encounters there. So I think he's very much interested in looking at the sort of the lower sides of life and the underclasses and the people who have perhaps dropped out or lost out in society, and tries to capture a real sense of their spirit and their humanity. And to some extent with hilarious consequences. There's some quite funny renderings there, but also some real tragedy, real pathos.
I think it's like tragic comedy.
Yeah, very much so.
Yeah.
Very much so. And I think he captures that really, really well, really nicely.
Okay, so thank you for today, Ben. And I think we'll still continue the intelligent dance music next time, and we will still continue talking about movie and literature.
Don't forget the magazine as well.
Oh yeah. So with the Literature Association, we also call for submissions. If you have any writing or drawing or painting or anything, any artwork, please just submit, and we will post basically. We will basically publish everything. And the reason why we start this magazine is we want to, because in this age, people just read or just use their phone on internet, but we still think that book is something important and beautiful. And I think if we publish a book, and then we can see that our art is really there, we can touch it.
So send us your work. One other thing as well, I'm also connected with the UCC skateboarding club.
You are so busy.
I'll post.
You're the instructor.
I know, I'm apparently the instructor, and I'm supposed to help, but I don't know exactly what's happening. But if any of you are interested in skateboarding, then we'll put the QR code for the line group on the Facebook page, and you can see it. We'll put a load of other stuff on the Facebook page for you to look at. And also, if you're interested in joining the Literature Association, do send us a message as well. Okay.
Okay. Bye bye.